Hello everyone, welcome into Coach Craig's Sports. This is going to be my first UFL video for the season. It's going to be my UFL 2025 team previews. So I'm going to be walking through each of the teams, kind of talking about the players that did make the final roster. We did get cut day a couple days ago. Could be some other pieces on the move through the waiver wire system, everything else like that, players signing, everything else like that. And just before this video was recorded, Reggie Barlow is announced that he will not be the head coach for the DC Defenders at this point in time. It sounds like their quarterback coach, I believe Shannon Harris, will be the interim head coach. You know, Greg Williams probably had the qualifications to be that, but I think they want him to stick on the defensive side. Fred Case as the offensive coordinator, unless he follows Reggie Barlow. Kind of had those two in place and then just kind of have the head coach take over in Shannon Harris, who was the quarterbacks coach for them. So that's pretty big news. We'll see if anything else transpires with all that being said. But we're going to start off with the Birmingham Stallions. They have probably one of the most put together teams. A lot of these guys have either played for the Birmingham Stallions last year or in previous seasons, so definitely do like that. In the quarterback room, we have Alex Mugu returning. He is the former USFL MVP, spent the last 2 years on the Packers practice squad between quarterback and wide receiver. He actually was transitioned a little bit more towards wide receiver at the NFL level last year, but do expect that he will be the starting quarterback for the Birmingham Stallions to start off the season since he is the former MVP. Behind him, there's going to be Matt Corral, who had his flashes last year, and then their quarterback 3 appears to be Case Cookus at this point in time, who obviously has played with the Philadelphia Stars and the Memphis Showboats in the past, so a very, very talented and loaded quarterback room overall. They returned the 3 same running backs as last year with CJ Marable and Ricky Person Jr. leading the charge as kind of that 1-2 punch. Larry Roundtrue operating as that running back 3 and probably only playing on game days when one of the 2 above him are out. And then their wide receiver room, it's pretty talented at this point in time. They do return a lot of the guys from last year in Amari Rogers, Marlon Williams, and Deon Cain. Those would be the 3 main ones that they returned from last year. Obviously, all of them did have some elements of success. Amari Rogers did a little bit of punt returning as well. Deon Cain a little bit in that kick return game. And then they also get Austin Watkins and Davion Davis back, who played for the team in the past, had some success there. So a very talented wide receiver room. They also added in former South Dakota State wide receiver and Seattle Seahawks practice squad member Cade Johnson, who, had some flashes in college, obviously, was in the NFL practice squad with the Seahawks for quite a bit of time. And then Jalen Camp, who did test really well, has been on some NFL practice squads, very minimal time at the NFL level. So a very talented wide receiver room once again. If I had to guess at this point in time, I'd say the top 4 are probably going to be Marlon Williams, Austin Watkins, Davion Davis, and Deon Cain. We'll see whether or not Cade Johnson, Jalen Camp get into that mix, and then Amari Rogers probably just going to be more of a punt returner this year overall with that talented wide receiver room. And then I will say, too, with the spreadsheet that I do have here, I do have slash-through lines for all the guys that either got cut or retired in the recent weeks, just in case they would happen to come back with the team. That I do have all these stats here. This document that I'm going through is up on my Patreon page. Very small monthly donation over there if you want to check it out. A lot of good information as we do head into the season. And then we move down to their tight end room. Pretty familiar names here. Jace Sternberger as the tight end 1 once again. Obviously been very effective at the UFL level. And then Jordan Thomas behind some returns. And then LaMichael Petaway does come back to the team this year. He was with them 2 seasons ago. And then we do see that Marcus Bowe was cut in recent days. So with all that being said, a lot of stability and continuity for this Birmingham Stallions team. Offensive line is pretty similar to last season as well. Defense, a couple changes on the defensive end. Obviously, probably the biggest one's going to be Scooby Wright's not returning. They did cut DeMarcus Gates in recent days. I think he might be getting a chance with an NFL practice squad or futures contract once again, though. So probably the one unit that has the least amount of continuity is going to be that defense. They did lose a couple guys in that corner room as well. So definitely look out for them in the early seasons in terms of defense. And then when we go over to the coaching staff, I'm just going to slide over here. Skip Holtz is returning as the head coach. Obviously, he's the 3-time reigning champion as a head coach. He will return to be the full-time play caller on the offensive end. And then Corey Chamberlain does return as the defensive coordinator once again this season. So coaching staff's going to be pretty similar to what we've seen in recent seasons. Then we move down to Houston Roughnecks. It kind of seems like at this point in time, the quarterback competition is between Nolan Henderson, who returns from last season, had a little bit of flashes, had a couple starts last year, and then Anthony Brown, who comes over from some NFL practice squads, played at Boston College, played at Oregon, was kind of on the Ravens and Cardinals practice squad. I think he played like 1 game at the NFL level. Does offer some rushing upside. Kind of all 3 of the quarterbacks that are here do offer some element of rushing upside. Jalen McClendon appears to be the quarterback 3 at this point in time, and he's probably the favorite for a lot of guys entering this offseason. So that kind of says a little bit about him, but I do assume that Anthony Brown is probably the most talented guy in this room. We'll see how long that does take for him to overtake that starting job, and I would not be surprised if both Henderson and Brown see action in week number 1. Then moving down to the running back room, we saw TJ Pledger get cut, which was a kind of a big surprise for this running back room overall. He's had some success at the UFL level, at the USFL level, so wouldn't be surprised if he latches on with another team sooner rather than later. Kirk Merritt's probably going to be the primary back. He is a converted wide receiver. He's going to be very involved in that receiving game out of the backfield, so I would assume that he's kind of lead guy as a quandary, right? Probably going to get some of that early down work. And then they also have Lorenzo Lingard, who, kind of bounced around college football. Played some time with Miami, played some time with Florida, played some time with Akron. Didn't really do too much in college, though, so probably going to be the wide receiver 3 as we do to start off the season. Then we move down to wide receiver room. We see a couple familiar faces here in Emmanuel Butler, Chike Kism, Justin Hall, and Reggie Roberson. The new guys coming in are going to be TJ Vasher, who comes over from the San Antonio Brahmas team. He had a little bit of success 2 years ago with San Antonio, really didn't play at all last year. Then Lawrence Keys coming in, it's kind of like a slot wide receiver as well, played his college ball at Notre Dame and Tulane, had a little bit of success there, but nothing too crazy. I think mainly at this point in time, we're seeing a lot of what we saw last year. Probably Justin Hall is the primary guy coming out of the slot, and then probably getting Chike Kism, Emmanuel Butler on the outside. TJ Vasher could also mix in on that outside as well, and then Roberson and Keys probably, getting some snaps here and there, but nothing too major at this point in time. I would say the main guy is probably going to be Justin Hall once again in that receiving game. And it's going to be very interesting with that mobile quarterback to see how much they actually do ultimately end up throwing the ball. Moving down to the tight end position, technically all 3 of these guys are new this season. Although Josh Peterson does return at tight end, he most recently spent time with the Jacksonville Jaguars practice squad. He's had some success at the USFL level before with this Houston Roughnecks team, so I would expect him to kind of be their number 2 option in the passing game. Cam Sutton comes over. He most recently played with the Vegas Vipers in 2023. And then Jaquarius Spivey, I really don't know too much about him, but he played his college ball with Mississippi State and TCU, so kind of an interesting guy there. I think he's probably going to be more of like a blocking project tight end at this point in time. And then I think that defense, the defensive line is really good, but I think they have some question marks in that linebacker and defensive back unit. And then in terms of coaches, Curtis Johnson, CJ Johnson returns as the head coach. Eric Price returns as the offensive coordinator, although it is in a co-offensive coordinator capacity. I believe he's going to be doing the passing aspect of the offensive coordinator, and Tom Cable will be the run game coordinator. So Tom Cable, who was most recently an offensive line coach for the Raiders, and then Chris Wilson does return as the defensive coordinator. So a good amount of continuity coming in there. We'll see if Cable can affect this offensive line and run game overall. Then we move down to the Memphis Showboats. They have a lot of changes here because they have a new head coach and offensive play caller, and Ken Wisenhunt obviously has a ton of experience at the NFL level. I think it's really going to help out this offense and this team overall as a whole. And then Jaron Horton takes over as that defensive coordinator. He was most recently the defensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Maulers in the 2 seasons that they had in the USFL. A very, very good young defensive coordinator. He's going to make a major difference on this defense overall. In terms of the quarterback room, they have Troy Williams returning. He had a couple starts for them last season. EJ Perry was picked up from the Michigan Panthers after he was granted his release by them. I assume that EJ Perry is probably going to get the first crack, but he's probably going to go back and forth between him and Troy Williams, at least early on in the season. And then Dresser Wynn came in as the quarterback 3. He played his college ball at UT Martin, had a brief stint with the Rams practice squad in 2023. He's had like a couple like CFL tryouts, but really hasn't done too much overall. Kyle Loxley also does come over from the CFL. He played his college ball, I believe, at UTSA, played most recently in the CFL. He has some experience at quarterback, some experience at wide receiver. It looks like they're primarily going to use him as a wide receiver, but would not be surprised if he lines up in like a wildcat formation, short yardage guy, anything else like that. In terms of the running back room, it's a brand new room overall. They did cut out a couple guys early on. So the running back room that they're going to have at this point in time is going to be Jacob Kadobi, who played his college ball at Texas A&M and Louisiana. So a little bit of success there at the college level, was on the practice squad with the Saints and the Browns, had a brief cup of coffee in some NFL games this season as well. Generic Prince behind him. He is a former Tulsa running back who had some practice squad opportunities with the Kansas City Chiefs and Miami Dolphins. And then Jalen Jackson, who played his college ball at Villanova, was on the Jacksonville Jaguars practice squad. Didn't do too much in the preseason. Kind of a little bit bigger back at this point in time. I do expect that Kadobi and Prince would probably get the first cracks at this running back room overall, but not a room that we're trying to attack quite a bit until we kind of see who that clear defined number 1 option is at this point in time. Moving down to the wide receivers, obviously we talked about Kyle Loxley, who is kind of that quarterback wide receiver versatile player. That'll be very interesting to see how they use him overall. We do get Dee Anderson and Jonathan Adams both returning this season. I think D. Anderson's probably going to get a little bit of a step up, at least early on the season. David Davis does return. He technically wasn't cut. I know there was like some rumors that he got cut, but he has not been medically cleared to play at this point in time. So I do have him listed as kind of on the injured list, question mark at this point in time. His status is truly up in the air. Kwame Lassiter comes over. He played his college ball at Kansas, spent some time with the Cincinnati Bengals, mainly on their practice squad the last 3 seasons. Could have an impact on this team overall. Eli Stove comes over, played his college ball at Auburn. He had some opportunities in the USFL with the Breakers in 2023, played in the CFL with the Red Blacks in 2024. Isaiah Washington comes over as well, who was a former Rutgers wide receiver. Don't know too much about him. At least early on this season, I would assume that Jonathan Adams, D. Anderson would be the 2 primary guys. Kwame Lassiter probably working a little bit as well. We'll see if Eli Stove or Kyle Loxley kind of operates in that primary slot role, and if anything else changes, at least early on in the season. I think they could add to this wide receiver room at this point in time. They did cut some guys that I did like at the same time as well. And then in terms of their tight ends that they ended up keeping, they got J.J. Wilson, kind of that versatile athletic tight end, probably going to take over in a big role with Sage Surratt not coming back this season. And then they have 2 blocking tight ends in Ryan Izzo and Chris Pierce. Ryan Izzo played with the Philadelphia Stars in 2023 in the USFL. And then Chris Pierce played his college ball at Vanderbilt and has been on some NFL practice squads. But J.J. Wilson probably going to be that more versatile pass-catching tight end. The other 2 guys I would expect to mainly operate in a blocking role. And I do like this Showboats defense overall. I think they added some good players. Obviously, Jaron Horton coming in is going to play a major effect for them overall. Moving on to the Michigan Panthers, obviously they moved on from E.J. Perry. They started a plethora of quarterbacks last season. Danny Allen and Bryce Perkins are essentially operating as quarterback 1 at this point in time, and they have announced that pretty much both of them are going to see game action probably in the first game of the season. Rocco Lombardi is the clear number 3. He played his college ball at Michigan State and Northern Illinois. Obviously, Danny Allen and Bryce Perkins both with the team last season. They both had some success and are both pretty mobile quarterbacks at the end of the day. Matthew Colburn returns as the primary running back. They did move on from West Hills. He did not come back. Nate McCreary had a couple flashes last year, probably going to operate as that running back too, but they have really hyped up Jaden Sheridan, who was not with the team last season. Obviously is a rookie coming over from Monmouth where he played his college ball. And then we move down to the wide receiver room. There's a lot of familiar faces here. There's a couple new guys as well. So Devin Ross does return, probably going to operate as kind of like a wide receiver 4. Marcus Sims had a really good season last year. I believe he was on the Seattle Seahawks practice squad for a little bit of time. Technically, he was a guy that I believe recently came back to the team, so I don't have his stats in here at this point in time. I will be adding them in the coming days. Syoso Mariner came over from the CFL midseason last year and had a pretty good role for this team, so I assume that him and Marcus Sims probably going to operate as kind of like number 1 and number 2 at this point in time. Trey Quinn did ultimately end up retiring, so there is opportunities to go around for this team overall. Samson Nakua does return. He didn't do too much last year, but could operate as kind of, like a depth wide receiver. Xavier Malone, Jalen Moore, and Malik Turner are 3 new players to this team. All 3 of them have some experience with NFL practice squads, so I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever one of those 3 guys makes a pretty big role on this team overall. Malik Turner kind of being the bigger body guy out of those 3, but obviously there's a clear slot role available with Trey Quinn not returning for this team overall. In terms of the tight end room, pretty similar last year. We got Cole Hicatini as the tight end 1. Gunnar Oaks, who played behind him last season, didn't do too much, but he will be returning as probably the tight end 2 or 3. And then Jalen Watermeyer comes in, who played his college ball at Texas A&M. Once upon a time was considered a pretty decent prospect, but he was a guy that did completely bomb at the NFL Combine in his pro day. Never really got too much of a chance at the NFL level. We'll have to see if he ultimately ends up making his mark at the UFL level or if he just kind of falls by the wayside once again. In terms of the coaching staff for this Michigan Panthers team, they returned their head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator. So would expect pretty similar results to last season, hopefully a little bit more stability at that quarterback position, and hopefully less injuries overall. Then we move over to the Arlington Renegades. They return Luis Perez at quarterback. He is probably the most seasoned veteran out of the UFL quarterbacks once again. Had a really good season last year, is the clear quarterback 1. Holton Ahlers returns as quarterback 2 behind him. Really didn't play last year. I know they did have Lindsey Scott last year. He has actually retired and transitioned to coaching at the college football level. So Luke Lennon comes in as the quarterback 3. He was not with the team last year. Played his college ball with North Central College. That is a school in Naperville, Illinois. Had a lot of success at the Division III level, and he's played pretty well at that level. So will be an interesting project quarterback as a quarterback 3 for them overall. In terms of the running back room, a lot of turnover here. Kalen Balaj comes over. He was with the Brahmas in 2023. Davion Smith did just return in recent days, but we'll have to see how he gets ramped up as the season gets closer because he just signed this week. We'll see what type of shape he's in. And then Day Hunter does also return. Is probably like that change of pace, pass catching back as Kalen Balaj and Davion Smith, kind of a similar type of body build. In terms of the wide receiver room for the Arlington Renegades, we see a lot of familiar faces. They're going to return their top 3 guys in Javante Payton, Deontay Burnett, and Tyler Vaughns. Isaiah Winstead and Lawan Whittingham both back this season. Winstead had a couple of flashes at times. Whittingham really didn't do too much for them last season. Actually didn't record any stats at all. And then they also did bring in David Durden, who was an interesting Division II player. He played his college ball at Mercer and West Florida. He had a stint with the Cowboys in 2023, but ultimately did end up tearing his ACL. He was a pretty athletic player overall. And then the last guy that is in this room is Damon Sheehy Gillespie, who is a very interesting story, but he has been placed on the injured list. He had a really strong season in 2024 in the Italian Football League. I believe he led the league in receiving yards and touchdowns, so he could be a very interesting player for them. He's a guy that can affect the return game as well, but we'll have to wait a couple weeks to see him as he is starting the season off on that injured list. And then in terms of their tight end room, Sal Cannell is back, Seth Green is behind him, and then Curtis Hodges joins the team as probably that tight end 3. Played his college ball at Arizona State, and he had some chances at the NFL level with the Washington Commanders, but spent 2 years on the injured reserves. So hopefully he stays healthy and can kind of revitalize his career overall. That Arlington Renegades defense, they do have some changes on that defensive line, so we'll see what that looks like for them overall this season. And then in terms of their coaching staff, we have Bob Stoops returning as the head coach. Chuck Long returns as the offensive coordinator. And then they do have co-defensive coordinators, with Jay Hayes operating as the run game coordinator and Marvin Sims operating as the pass game coordinator. So a lot of familiarity with their coaching staff once again. They are one of those teams that are kind of solid, steady, consistent. They can go out and win any given week, but they can also kind of go out and lose on any given week at the same time as well. Then we move down to the DC Defenders. Like I mentioned at the top of this video, head coach Reggie Barlow is going to be moving on. He's going to be returning to the college game to operate as a head coach there, probably at Tennessee State, with Eddie George moving on to Bowling Green. So we'll see if any of his coaching staff follows him there. It's kind of unfortunate that this is happening a week before the season. And like I said, this news just broke a couple hours ago. So that is a major, major factor. Shannon Harris, the quarterback coach, will operate as the interim head coach. I do assume that Greg Williams and Fred Kais stay on as offensive and defense coordinator just to have some stability. But I would not be surprised if Fred Kais follows Reggie Barlow once again, as they do have a lot of familiarity with one another. But in terms of their roster overall, Jordan Teamo returns as the starting quarterback for this team. He had a pretty good season in 2024. Obviously, a strong veteran presence there. He offers some mobility at quarterback as well. Mike DeLeo will operate as the quarterback 2 behind him. Joined the team last year late in the season, but never entered a game. And then Spencer Sanders will be their quarterback 3 to start off the season. Played his college ball at Oklahoma State and Ole Miss. And, he had some flashes at times. He is a mobile quarterback, so he does make some sense to have behind Jordan Teamo kind of coming along as a developmental quarterback. In terms of their running back room, they get Abram Smith back. He unfortunately tore his ACL last year after having a really strong 2023 season. Obviously, would like to see him back to 100%. It might take him a couple weeks to get to that point, but he is probably going to be the running back 1 once again. Deion Jackson comes over probably as running back 2. He has some NFL experience playing for the Colts for a couple of years, as well as the New York Giants. And then Darius Higgins returns as kind of that pass catching running back. He was a little bit involved last season as they kind of went running back by committee overall. In terms of that wide receiver room, there's going to be a lot of new faces here overall, but Ty Scott and Chris Rowland both return. I expect them to kind of be the 1 and the 2 for this team overall. Ty Scott obviously operating on the outside, Chris Rowland operating out of the slot. They brought a lot of faces in this offseason, a lot of former NFL guys. A lot of those guys did ultimately end up getting cut as well. Jane Mickens comes over. He played with the Jaguars and the Buccaneers in the NFL, probably going to operate mainly as a return guy. Javon Antonio comes over. He kind of bounced around a lot, but is a big body wide receiver. Most recently played with Colorado. Cornell Powell played his college ball with Clemson, was on the Chiefs practice squad like the last 3 or 4 years, so he could have a little bit of upside there. There was a little bit of controversy with him as it looked like he was cut early on, but his name was just kind of forgotten on like the initial release, but he is on the team at this point in time. And then Braylon Sanders, another guy with some NFL experience, played his college ball at Ole Miss. He had some stints in the NFL with the Miami Dolphins and the Patriots practice squad. So at least early on in the season, I expect Ty Scott, Chris Rowland, and probably Braylon Sanders to be the top 3 wide receivers. Cornell Powell could get some opportunities on that outside as well. And then in terms of the tight end room, Brilliamore McKinney does return as their top tight end once again. Ben Bredesen operating behind him as kind of a blocking tight end. And then they did bring in Mason Fairchild, who played his college ball at Kansas, a little bit more of a receiving tight end overall. Devin Asiasi was a former NFL guy that they did bring in, but was unfortunately cut in that last round of cuts as well. And the DC Defenders defense, I think they're going to have a pretty solid defense overall, and obviously they're going to bring the pressure under defensive coordinator Greg Williams. Then we move over to the San Antonio Brahmas. They return their head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator once again, leading the charge with Wade Phillips. At this point in time, Kellen Mond has been named the official quarterback one. He obviously was not with the team last year. He was a former third-round pick by the Minnesota Vikings. Didn't really do too much at the NFL level. Had a couple opportunities with the Vikings. Was on the Cleveland Browns practice squad as well. Never really lived up to the hype that he did have in college. Kevin Hogan probably going to operate as the quarterback number 2. Spent some time with this team last year. Very minimal stats. Obviously played his college ball at Stanford. Bounced around the NFL quite a bit. He very experienced backup. And then Jared Garantano coming over from the Houston Roughnecks. Probably going to operate as their quarterback 3. A guy that does have some flashes at times, but very, very inconsistent overall. In terms of their running back room, they returned both Anthony McFarland and John Lovett, probably is that 1-2 punch once again. And then they also have Jayshon Corbin coming in, who played his college ball at Texas A&M and Florida State. Really good at Florida State. And then he had a cup of coffee at the NFL level, mainly with the New York Giants practice squad. In terms of the wide receivers, they returned their top 3 from last year in Justin Smith, Jonte Kirkland, and Marquez Stevenson. And then they did bring in some new guys as well. Rashawn Henry came over. He's got some experience with NFL practice squads, but he has been placed on the injured list. Racey McMath was a former 6th-round pick out of LSU by the Tennessee Titans. Really didn't do too much at the NFL level. Probably going to be a core special teamer, but could have some chances at the UFL level as well. Matthew Sexton comes over. He was most recently with the Vegas Vipers in 2023. Spent some time with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Spent some time with the Atlanta Falcons practice squad. Could be an interesting guy in this offense overall. Greg Ward is a former Houston quarterback turned wide receiver. Played in the NFL with the Philadelphia Eagles from 2017 to 2023. Is an interesting slot wide receiver. Could be their second slot for this team overall. And then Javon Baker comes over, playing his college ball at South Alabama, and then has spent some time with the Saints and Patriots in terms of their practice squads over the last 3 or 4 seasons. So they have a pretty deep overall wide receiver room. I would assume that the top 3 are going to be the top 3 once again early on this season, but would not be surprised whatsoever to see Sexton, Ward, and Baker get some action at the same time as well. In terms of their tight end room, Cody Lattimore does not come back, but Alize Mack will be back. He had a couple of receptions last year and a couple of touchdowns, so he's a very good proven veteran. And then they did get some wide receiver tight end converts in Isaiah Gathens and Jacob Harris. Gathens played his college ball at Gardner-Webb, Middle Tennessee State, and spent some time on the Chiefs practice squad. And then Jacob Harris played his college ball at Central Florida, spent some time with the Rams and the Jaguars, primarily on the practice squad overall. And then the Brahmas defense probably going to be really solid once again, obviously with Wade Phillips being their head coach. But definitely do expect the Brahmas to have a really good season overall. It'll be interesting to see if Kellen Mond holds on to that quarterback position or if Kevin Hogan ultimately ends up overtaking him at some point in time. Then we move down to the St. Louis Battlehawks. They have not announced a starter at quarterback at this point in time. A.J. McCarron's not back, so the only quarterback that they do return is Manny Wilkins. He had a couple starts last year, more of a rushing threat than a passer. It wasn't that great in the passing department. They do have Max Duggan coming over from the Chargers. He was a 7th-round pick by them, played his college ball at TCU, had various levels of success at TCU. Obviously, led them to the national championship game where they did unfortunately get blown out. And then Chavon Cordero is also there as well. He's a little bit of a mobile quarterback. He's obviously had some success at Hawaii and San Jose State. He was in minicamp with the Seattle Seahawks, but ultimately ended up getting cut by them as well. In terms of the running back room, Jacob Sadlers returns as the primary running back. Behind him, we got Kevin Latalus, probably mispronouncing his name, but he was with the team last year, mainly played special teams. And then Javion Howard, who was not with the team last year, played his college ball at Syracuse and Alcorn State. So behind Sailors, it's going to be a little bit of a competition, but I do assume that Sailors will be the primary ball carrier, at least early on to start the season, and hopefully staying healthy. In terms of the wide receiver room, Marcel Aitman, Darius Shepard are not back this season. Hakeem Butler returns. He'll be probably the wide receiver 1 for them. And then Jakur Pearson behind him, probably going to operate as wide receiver 2. Blake Jackson's also back in the mix. He didn't do too much for them last season. And then they also added some former NFL guys, and Denzel Mims, Sam Wiggles, and Frank Darby. So Denzel Mims, obviously a former 2nd-round pick by the Jets, bounced around the NFL quite a bit, played his college ball at Baylor. Sam Wiggles played his college ball at Ohio State, then transferred to Ohio, had some success at Ohio, and was a member of the Rams practice squad last season. Frank Darby was drafted by the Atlanta Falcons, played very, very minimally with them, played his college ball, I believe, at Arizona State. And then Gary Jennings is returning to the team after spending last year with the Birmingham Stallions. So an interesting wide receiver room. At least early on, I'd be most interested in Hakeem Butler and Jakur Pearson. Somebody else could work their way up in that pecking order as well. And then in terms of their tight end room, they returned Jake Sutherland as their primary tight end. Had a little bit of success last year. Kamari Averett was cut in their most recent round of cuts, and he is getting replaced by Chase Allen, who played his college ball at Iowa State and had some stints with multiple NFL practice squads, most notably the New York Giants and Chicago Bears. And then that Battlehawks defense, they do have some turnover there, but I expect them to be a very, very good defensive unit once again. In terms of that St. Louis Battlehawks coaching staff, Anthony Beck returns as the head coach. Bruce Gradkowski has moved on. I believe he's going to be with the Detroit Lions this season. So Phil McGowan, probably mispronouncing his name. I really don't know how to say that one whatsoever. He takes over as the offensive coordinator. He was their wide receivers coach in 2024. And then Donnie Abraham does return as that defensive coordinator. So a decent amount of stability there. We'll have to see ultimately how the offense changes with Gradkowski moving on, but overall should be a pretty solid team. Obviously there is that question at that quarterback position with no A.J. McCarron returning this season. But with that being said, that's just kind of an overall UFL preview of the 8 teams, kind of going through the players that did make it through the final rounds of cuts. Obviously there's probably going to be some more movement in coming days, so I will update this sheet. Once again, it will be up on my Patreon page. Next week I'll be doing my UFL DFS video for week number 1. I think it's going to be a very interesting slate. If you're into UFL DFS, definitely be sure to check that out as well. But very excited for the UFL season. If there's anything you guys like to say related to UFL, any questions you guys might have, definitely feel free to leave them down in the comments and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. But with that being said, if you were brand new to my channel, checking out for the very first time, or have yet to subscribe, please consider doing so. Definitely would appreciate it. Helps to build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports, which is one that's truly for you, the viewers, helping you with your DFS. Right now we have NBA DFS in terms of the core pick videos Tuesday through Friday. Next week we'll be starting up some MLB DFS. We'll be starting up UFL DFS. So it's going to be a very busy and exciting week overall. And then obviously I've been putting out some NFL draft content as well. So if you're interested in any of that whatsoever, definitely would appreciate the support. Definitely means a lot to me. And then last but not least, if you're interested in sports betting, if you're interested in prop betting whatsoever, be sure to check out the links and promo codes down in the description below for BetUS, Parlay Play, and Prize Picks. If you are a brand new user on any one of those 3 sites, when you sign up, make your initial deposit, you will get a first match deposit bonus. For Prize Picks and Parlay Play, it's 100% match up to $100. And then for BetUS, it's 125% match up to $2,000. So some pretty great opportunities to be had out there. If you have any other additional questions related to that whatsoever, feel free to reach out to me, whether it's down in the comment section of this video or on Twitter at Coach Craig Sport, and be more than happy to help you with that journey as well. But with that being said, that's all that I truly have for today's video. Definitely do appreciate each and every one of you tuning in. Definitely means a lot to me. I hope that each and every one of you have a great rest of your day, no matter what day you're watching this on, and have the opportunity to enjoy the UFL for the 2025 season.